The train screeched to a halt with a hiss of steam, its whistle echoing across the dusty plains of Dry Creek, a small frontier town nestled between rolling hills and the endless horizon. The station was little more than a weather-beaten platform, a few benches, and a crooked sign leaning against the wind. The year was 1884, a time when dreams often traveled westward, tucked inside letters sealed with hope. Clara Whitmore stepped off the train, her gloved hands trembling as she clutched a small carpet bag and a folded letter, the letter that had changed her life. Written in a neat, masculine hand, it had promised her a husband, a home, and a new beginning far from the disappointments of the East. After months of lonely correspondence, she had dared to believe she might find love, or at least kindness, in this rugged new world. Her dress, though modest, spoke of careful mending and gentle pride. She smoothed it down nervously as her gaze swept across the platform. She spotted him immediately, a tall man in a fine suit, hat in hand, eyes sharp with expectation. Mr. Samuel Dwyer, her intended groom. Her heart fluttered as she stepped forward, ready to introduce herself. But the warmth she hoped for never came. His expression darkened the moment their eyes met. "You're Miss Whitmore?" His tone carried disappointment and disbelief. "Yes," she replied softly, trying to smile. "It's me, Clara. I came as soon as your last letter arrived." Samuel's lips tightened. "You didn't mention your age." Clara blinked, startled. "I'm 26. It was in my letter." "I expected someone younger," he interrupted coldly. "Someone different." The word struck like a slap. Around them, a few townsfolk had paused to watch, their whispers carried by the wind. Samuel looked her up and down, his frown deepening. "I can't do this." "I won't." She stood frozen as he turned and walked away, his boots crunching against the dry earth, leaving her alone on the platform with nothing but a carpet bag and a heart sinking under the weight of humiliation. The station master, an older man with kind eyes, offered her a hesitant nod but said nothing. Clara lifted her chin, willing herself not to cry. She had crossed half the country for this, sold her few belongings, left her home behind, and now she had nowhere to go. The wind picked up, tugging at her bonnet. The last train whistle faded in the distance, and the crowd slowly dispersed. In moments, the platform was empty. Only Clara remained, a figure of quiet despair beneath the setting sun. Hours passed. She sat on her suitcase by the edge of the platform, shivering as twilight deepened. Every sound, a coyote's distant call, the creak of a sign, felt heavier in the growing dark. When hoofbeats broke the silence, she startled. A rider approached from the direction of the hills, his figure framed against the blood-red sky. He dismounted quietly, tall and broad-shouldered, with a rough beard and a sheriff's badge glinting in the fading light. His coat looked worn but cared for, and his eyes, an unsettling shade of gray, studied her with a mix of caution and concern. "You lost, ma'am?" His voice was deep, measured, carrying the calm authority of someone used to silence. Clara hesitated, then spoke, her voice trembling. "Not lost, just left behind," the man's gaze softened. "Name's Elias Gray, sheriff around these parts. You can't stay out here after dark. Town's no place for a woman alone." Clara looked down at her hands, her pride warring with exhaustion. "I'll be fine," she whispered. Elias shook his head. "No, you won't." He extended a gloved hand toward her. "Come on, I've got a cabin a few miles out. Safe, warm, and quiet." For a moment, Clara hesitated. Then, with the last of her courage, she took his hand, unaware that the man rescuing her carried a secret that could change both their fates forever. The ride to Sheriff Elias Gray's cabin took them away from town, the path winding through stretches of wild prairie and sparse pine forest. The moon rose pale and watchful above the hills, its light spilling over the land like silver milk. Clara sat stiffly behind Elias on his horse, clutching her bag, her mind still reeling from the events of the day. The rhythmic sound of hooves against the dry earth was the only thing steady in her spinning world. She hadn't planned to accept help from a stranger, especially not a man, but desperation had left her no choice. Samuel's rejection still echoed in her chest, sharp as a splinter, but Elias's calm voice had cut through the haze of shame and fear. "Not far now," he said over his shoulder. His tone was gentle but firm, the voice of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Clara nodded, though he couldn't see her. "Thank you, Sheriff Gray. I'm sorry to trouble you." "No trouble," he replied shortly. "You'd have frozen if I left you there." Something in his tone discouraged further talk, and she fell silent. Yet as they rode, she couldn't help but study the man before her. There was an air of solitude about him, like someone who'd spent too many nights listening to the wind instead of voices. His shoulders were broad, his movements deliberate, but what struck her most was his stillness. He moved like part of the land, quiet, watchful, and untamed. When they reached the cabin, she saw it was modest but sturdy, nestled between tall pines and overlooking a narrow stream. Smoke rose from the chimney, curling into the cold night air. Elias helped her down from the horse and led her inside. The warmth hit her immediately. The cabin smelled faintly of cedar and tobacco. A fire burned low in the stone hearth, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. The furnishings were simple: a table, a few chairs, a shelf lined with well-worn books, and a rifle resting above the door. Elias hung his hat and coat, then turned toward her. "You can have the bed. I'll take the chair by the fire." Her eyes widened. "Oh, no, I couldn't possibly, but you could, and you will," he interrupted, not unkindly. "You've had a rough day." Something in his quiet certainty made her obey. He moved around the cabin with unhurried ease, setting a kettle on the stove and ladling soup from a small pot. The aroma of herbs and wild vegetables filled the air. Clara sat at the table, her hands cupped around the tin mug he handed her. "You live out here all alone?" she asked softly. He nodded, leaning against the mantel. "Been that way a long time. Doesn't it get lonely?" Elias's gray eyes flickered toward the window, where the moonlight glowed faintly through the trees. "Sometimes. But solitude's easier than explaining what folks wouldn't understand." His words hung in the air, cryptic and heavy. Clara tilted her head, curiosity flickering behind her exhaustion. Before she could ask more, he changed the subject. "Town's not kind to strangers," he said. "You'll stay here a few days, then decide what you want to do." She nodded slowly. "Thank you, Sheriff. I don't know what I'd have done if you hadn't come." Elias gave a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Wasn't planning to be in town tonight. Guess fate had other ideas." Outside, a wolf howled, a long, mournful sound that echoed through the valley. Clara shivered, glancing toward the dark woods beyond the window. "Don't worry," Elias murmured. "They keep their distance." But when the howl came again, closer this time, something strange flickered across his face. A tightening of the jaw, a shadow in his eyes, almost as if the sound called to him. Clara noticed but said nothing. She was too tired to wonder, too grateful for warmth and safety. Later that night, as she lay beneath a quilt in the small bed, she heard the soft creak of floorboards and the cabin door opening. Peering through half-lidded eyes, she saw Elias step outside into the moonlight. For a moment he stood perfectly still, his silhouette sharp against the silver glow, before vanishing silently into the woods. Clara closed her eyes, her mind drifting between sleep and curiosity. She had no idea that the man who had rescued her was not entirely human, and that by morning, the wild in him would stir in ways neither of them could yet understand. The next morning broke soft and pale, sunlight dripping through the pine needles outside the cabin. A thin mist clung to the earth, curling lazily over the stream nearby. Clara awoke to the smell of coffee and the crackle of firewood. For the first time since her arrival in Dry Creek, the knot in her chest had loosened just a little. Elias was already awake. He looked as though he hadn't slept at all. He stood near the stove, sleeves rolled up, the faintest sheen of sweat along his temple. There was something different about him in the daylight, calmer but watchful, as if the dawn had brought him a measure of peace and also restraint. "Morning," he said, his voice low and steady. "Good morning," she replied, brushing sleep from her eyes. "You were up early." Old habits, he said simply. I take care of patrols around the ridge. Helps keep the coyotes and worse things away. Worse things? She asked, half smiling. Elias didn't answer right away. He poured her coffee instead and handed it over, his gray eyes unreadable. Out here, the wild's never too far away, he finally said. Best to respect it. Clara studied him as she sipped the coffee. He was kind, but guarded, like a man carrying a story he'd never tell. The cabin walls were lined with small traces of his life. A carved wooden wolf on the shelf. Claw marks etched faintly into the doorframe. A patch of fur draped near the hearth. Days passed, and a quiet rhythm settled between them. Clara helped with chores, hauling water, mending clothes, cooking simple meals, while Elias went on his patrols. He was always gone by dusk and never returned before dawn. When she asked where he went, he only said, "Out where it's quiet." At first, Clara thought little of it, but strange things began to happen as autumn deepened. One evening, while collecting firewood, she found a fresh deer carcass near the stream. The wounds were clean but savage, too precise for wolves. She told Elias about it, expecting concern, but he only tensed, his jaw tightening. "Stay close to the cabin after dark," he warned. "Promise me." "I will," she said, though unease flickered inside her. That night the wind howled through the trees, carrying with it a chorus of animal cries. Clara couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, the fire low, when she saw movement among the trees, a flash of silver-gray fur, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The creature paused, watching the cabin, before disappearing soundlessly into the woods. Her heart pounded. She wanted to wake Elias, but his chair by the fire was empty. In the morning, she found him outside, splitting wood. His shirt was torn at the sleeve, a streak of dried blood along his forearm. "You're hurt!" she exclaimed. "It's nothing," he muttered, pulling his sleeve down. "But," he cut her off, his tone sharper than usual. "I said it's nothing." The sudden edge in his voice silenced her. She turned away, stung, but later she caught the look of regret in his eyes. That night, he left again before moonrise, leaving her alone with questions she couldn't shake. Clara began to notice more peculiar things. How Elias's eyes seemed to glint faintly under the moon. How his senses were unnervingly sharp. How he could track things no ordinary man should be able to. And yet, despite his secrecy, she felt drawn to him. There was a quiet strength in his solitude, a sadness in his restraint. One evening, as they sat by the fire, she asked softly, "Why do you live so far from everyone?" He hesitated before answering. "Because sometimes being near people puts them in danger." The flicker of the firelight caught the haunted look in his eyes. Clara frowned. "What kind of danger?" Elias stared into the flames for a long time. "The kind that comes when you're not fully what you appear to be." Before she could ask more, a distant howl broke through the night, deep, resonant, and close. Elias stiffened, every muscle taut. His hand trembled slightly where it rested on the table. He stood abruptly. "Go to bed, Clara. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone till morning. Elias, what's happening?" He met her eyes, something wild and sorrowful flickering within them. "Please, just do as I say." Then he was gone, out the door, swallowed by the silver wash of moonlight, leaving Clara staring after him, her heart pounding with fear in the first, trembling realization that the sheriff who'd saved her might not be entirely human. The night was restless. Wind tore through the pines, the sky heavy with clouds that veiled the moon. Clara sat by the fire, heart racing, every creak of the cabin seeming louder in the hollow dark. Elias's warning echoed in her ears. "Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone till morning." But how could she sleep when the air itself felt alive with tension? She paced the cabin, glancing out the window every few minutes. Shadows moved among the trees, flickering just out of sight. At one point, she was certain she saw glowing eyes again, two orbs of silver staring from the tree line before vanishing into the gloom. Then came the gunshots. 3 of them. Distant but clear. Clara froze. Somewhere beyond the ridge, men were shouting, rough, angry voices that carried on the wind. She caught fragments of their words. "Find him! The sheriff's ours tonight. She's with him, too! Her blood ran cold. She recognized one of those voices, Samuel Dwyer. It all made terrible sense now. Samuel must have spread word that she'd run off with the sheriff, perhaps claiming Elias had kidnapped her. Or maybe he'd come for vengeance, humiliated that the woman he rejected had found safety in another man's care. Either way, they were coming. She snatched the rifle from above the door, hands trembling as she checked the chamber the way Elias had shown her earlier that week. The sound of horses drew closer, hooves striking hard against the rocky ground. And then, silence. The next moment, the door burst open. Samuel stood there, flanked by two other men, guns drawn. His eyes gleamed with something cruel and satisfied. "Well, well," he sneered. "Didn't take long for you to find another protector, did it, Clara?" "Get out," she said, forcing her voice steady. "The sheriff will be back any minute," he laughed. "Oh, I'm counting on it." Before she could react, one of the men lunged forward and grabbed her by the arm. She fought, kicking and struggling, but they overpowered her easily. Samuel smirked. "We'll wait for him together." A low growl rolled through the darkness outside, deep, resonant, and not quite human. The men froze, eyes darting toward the trees. "What the hell was that?" one of them whispered. Clara's pulse thundered. She knew that sound. She'd heard it before. Out in the woods on those nights, Elias vanished. The growl came again, closer this time, followed by a crash of branches. The horses outside screamed and bolted. Then he appeared. Bursting through the doorway was not the quiet sheriff she'd come to know, but a massive creature of muscle and fur, eyes glowing the same haunting gray she'd seen in Elias's. The men fired wildly, bullets thudding into the walls and splintering wood. The beast moved faster than thought. A flash of claws, a snarl that shook the air. Samuel screamed as he was thrown against the doorframe. His gun clattered to the floor. The other men fled, vanishing into the woods, leaving only the sound of their retreating shouts. For a heartbeat, Clara couldn't move. The creature stood there, breathing hard, its chest rising and falling, fur matted with blood. The firelight flickered across its face, both terrifying and strangely familiar. "Elias," she whispered. The beast hesitated, its ears flicking toward her voice. Slowly, painfully, it lowered its head, backing away from her. The rage in its eyes softened into something human, sorrow, guilt, recognition. She took a step forward. "It's you, isn't it?" The creature shuddered. A low whine escaped its throat. Then before her eyes, the transformation began to reverse. Muscles shifted, bones cracked, fur receded. And within moments, Elias was there, bare-chested, trembling, eyes filled with shame. "I didn't want you to see," he rasped, his voice rough from the change. "Not like this." Clara stared, tears blurring her vision. You saved me." He looked away. "I'm not a man, Clara, not completely. The thing you saw, that's what I am. A curse I carry." "No," she whispered, stepping closer. "You're the man who took me in when I had no one. Who gave me kindness when the world turned cruel. Whatever you are, it doesn't change that." Elias flinched as if her words hurt more than any bullet. "You should go. The town won't forgive what they'll call a monster." "Then I'll go where they can't find us," she said softly. He looked up, disbelief and longing warring in his eyes. "You'd stay? After what you've seen?" Clara nodded, tears falling freely now. "I'm not afraid of you, Elias Gray. I'm afraid of losing you." For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside, the forest was quiet again, the danger gone. Elias reached for her hand, his touch hesitant, trembling. "Then maybe there's still hope for me," he murmured, and in the flickering light of the dying fire, the beast and the woman who tamed his heart stood together, both scarred, both changed, yet bound by something stronger than fear. The morning sun broke slowly over the ridge, casting golden light across the cabin and the surrounding pine forest. The air smelled crisp and clean, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers and damp earth. For the first time in weeks, Clara felt a calmness she hadn't known since leaving the East. Elias was awake, sitting outside on the porch, shirtless, arms resting on his knees. His gaze lingered on the horizon, thoughtful and distant, as if measuring the day's dangers and possibilities. Clara approached quietly, her footsteps soft on the wooden boards. "You didn't sleep much," she said gently, settling beside him. He gave a small shrug. "Never do when there's a storm to watch over." His eyes flicked toward her. "Or a storm inside me." Clara smiled faintly, reaching out to take his hand. "I've seen the storm, Elias. I've seen it up close, and I'm not afraid." He looked at her, a mixture of wonder and disbelief in his gaze. You'd still be here, even after what you saw." "I would," she said firmly. "Because what you are doesn't change the man you've shown me. The man who saved me, protected me, and gave me a home when the world turned away. That's the man I love." Elias's eyes softened, and a weight he had carried for years seemed to lift from his shoulders. For the first time, he let himself truly exhale. "You're brave," he murmured. "Braver than anyone I've ever known." They sat together in silence for a moment, listening to the distant rush of the stream and the rustling of the trees. The forest had returned to peace, the threats of the past night fading like mist in the morning sun. "We can't stay forever. Hidden," Clara said softly, though a smile played on her lips. "The town will talk. People will never fully understand you." Elias nodded, but his grip on her hand tightened. "I don't care what they think anymore. I've spent too long hiding, too long fearing judgment. If we face the world together, maybe I can finally live as myself." Clara leaned against him, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. "Then we face it together. No running, no hiding. Just us." Days turned into weeks. With Clara by his side, Elias felt more alive than he had in years. She helped him with the small tasks of daily life, mending clothes, tending the garden, and cooking meals that filled the cabin with warmth and laughter. And though he could not fully control the shifter within him, he no longer felt the need to retreat into solitude. The villagers of Dry Creek grew curious about the woman living on the ridge with the reclusive sheriff, but no one dared approach. Whispers of strange occurrences in the forest persisted, yet Clara never faltered. Her presence gave Elias courage. Her love gave him a sense of belonging he had never known. One evening, under a full moon, Elias shifted partially into his shifter form, not to hide, not to hunt, but as a demonstration of trust. Clara watched, calm and unafraid, and reached out to touch his furred arm. "You're magnificent," she whispered. "But more than that, you're mine." He allowed her touch, a growl of contentment rumbling low in his chest. When he shifted back, he smiled. A real, unguarded smile, one that reached his eyes and softened his wild features. "I've never felt more whole," he admitted, voice low. "You're not alone anymore," Clara said. "Not ever." As the first light of dawn streaked across the sky, they stood side by side on the ridge, looking over the valley below. Two silhouettes against the golden horizon, a woman who had traveled far in search of a future, and a man who had spent a lifetime running from his own nature. Together, they had found a home, not in the world, but in each other. Love had bridged the gap between fear and acceptance, humanity and the wild, and as the sun climbed higher, it illuminated a new beginning, two hearts bound by courage, trust, and the quiet promise of forever.